several senators on the other side have been arguing against the provision in this bill to supercharge unemployment insurance right now, something that Senate Democrats have negotiated with the Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin, and Chairman Grassley. Based on what I'm hearing from senators on the other side, you'd think that this provision was pretty much going to end Western civilization. Now, supercharging unemployment benefits has long been a priority for Senate Democrats, and we've been fighting for those improvements in unemployment since the process began. In our view, it's the key to getting help to where...
Senator from Oregon?
Yes.
Would you please use your microphone?
Yes. Thank the President.
Certainly.
Supercharging unemployment benefits has long been something Senate Democrats have been fighting for. It's the key to getting help where it's needed most. And believe me, colleagues, when you see the unemployment claim numbers tomorrow, if the numbers are accurate, this chamber is going to see that the unemployment crisis is exploding in America. I don't believe anybody in our great country should fall into destitution as a result of this pandemic. So I obviously disagree with my colleagues who oppose our amendment so strongly to improve unemployment benefits. I just want to make a few key points in response to their argument. First, I want to start with an argument I heard that just about knocked the wind out of me when I heard it earlier. It's the idea that nurses are going to quit their jobs as a result of this legislation. Mr. President, nurses are not going to be quitting their jobs to get unemployment benefits, because that's not how nurses think when they get up in the morning. By now, everyone has seen the Herculean efforts of our nurses fighting the pandemic. Nurses in America are brave. They care. They're the true professionals. From Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine, they're on the front lines of this fight, putting themselves in harm's way to save the lives of our neighbors, whether it's in South Carolina, Oregon, or anywhere else. They don't cut and run. In contrary to the suggestion of my colleague from Nebraska, retired nurses have been coming out of retirement in droves to help treat patients who are suffering because of the coronavirus. Second, it's a head-scratcher to me that my colleague from Nebraska is raising this objection now. I'm the ranking Democrat in the Finance Committee. I learned about his objection when I watched his press conference, and then I called him about it. The proposal's been out there for days. Senators have known about it the whole time. It's not a drafting error. It's not a last-minute surprise. What the senator from Nebraska wants to, in effect, drop now was part of the bill. And Mr. President, you're a member of our committee, and I enjoy working with you. What the senator from Nebraska wants to drop now, in fact, was part of the bill that Republican leader McConnell introduced on Saturday. He introduced it on Saturday because Senate Democrats insisted on it being part of the package. And as Secretary Mnuchin said this afternoon on national television, we all heard it, Republicans agreed. I'll have a little more to say about Secretary Mnuchin's remarks in a minute. Third, I want to talk about why this is so needed, why my Democratic colleagues and I have worked so hard to help the millions hit by this economic wrecking ball, get through these horrendous times. For most Americans, the old unemployment rules would cover only a third to half of their lost wages. That's it. Pretty hard to pay the rent, put food on the table with that. Even before this crisis, Mr. President, the Federal Reserve found that nearly half of Americans wouldn't have been able to come up with $400 cash to cover costs in an emergency. So let's face it, millions of Americans were walking on an economic tightrope, balancing their rent against their food and the food against the fuel, and that was before the pandemic. That's why we on our side feel so strongly, so appreciative of the work of Senator Peters, Senator Menendez, who helped in the negotiations, and of course, the leader. We all said we need an improved supercharged unemployment benefit to replace people's lost wages. Those are people who shouldn't face a choice between homelessness, hunger, or bankruptcy because a virus has shut down our economy and cost them their job. This isn't the fault of any workers in South Carolina or Oregon or anywhere else. And while the consumer economy is shuttered, the Congress has a responsibility to make sure that Americans can bounce back in a matter of weeks or months. Otherwise, millions are going to struggle slowly to recover from the economic crisis, and many might not make it if the Senate doesn't move to help them now. Now. The panic people feel over the virus is already too much, and the least we can do as lawmakers is to have their backs when it comes to surviving this economic crisis. Now, all my colleagues know we're on the third bill in the fight against the virus. Mitch McConnell's first version of this bill did virtually nothing for those who are losing their jobs. I read it carefully. Out of 247 pages in the Republican leader's first bill, 8 lines of text, not 8 pages, 8 lines, and those 8 lines only dealt with filing for unemployment online. Now, that bill had an awful lot of corporate goodies, lots of slush funds for big corporations, but just a few measly lines for people hurting, for workers hurting, workers losing their jobs. Senate Democrats fought for and won changes that make up this robust, expanded, supercharged program of unemployment insurance. It's based on a bill that our colleague Senator Peters and I introduced not long ago. First, in these punishing economic times, Americans are going to need more weeks of coverage than they would otherwise get from unemployment insurance. The existing length of unemployment benefits will not cover the time this crisis will last. Second, the Senate needed to modernize the unemployment insurance program because it really hasn't changed much since it was developed in Wisconsin in 1932. Mr. President, 1932, nobody was talking about gig workers. And that unemployment program that was invented then hadn't changed all that much. Certainly hasn't been built to take on the kind of challenge our country faces right now. Democratic senators and I looked at that system and said this old system wouldn't be good enough for independent contractors, the self-employed, gig workers, part-time workers, and freelancers. They're a big part of the face of the modern economy. They weren't the kind of workers anybody was thinking about in 1932 when the program was invented. Senate Democrats led the effort to get those people coverage, and I'm glad that at one point in the negotiations, we could get bipartisan support for it. For people who still have their jobs but have their hours slashed, we're going to bat for them. For people in the service economy, restaurants, salons, gyms, you name it. All those people who are suffering because their jobs and their businesses have been put on pause, we're going to bat for them. We're talking about millions and millions of Americans, people who are looking at hard times ahead, and they need our help now. The old unemployment insurance system wasn't working, so Senate Democrats said, we're going to come together and we're going to go to bat for all those independent contractors and the self-employed and the freelancers and the gig workers. And now I think not only are we going to help them over the next 4 months, but I think we have developed some ideas that can be part of reforming the unemployment compensation system after those 4 months. Now, I want to turn to why this agreement raises benefits specifically by $600 per month. I've heard my colleagues and their strenuous objections to that amount. The reason it is $600, Mr. President, is because Labor Secretary Scalia, after meeting with the Senate negotiators, myself, Senator Grassley, Secretary Mnuchin, Senator Menendez, Senator Portman, big group of us. Secretary Scalia, after meeting with Senate negotiators, left us with no other way to get benefits to workers quickly. Secretary Scalia said that the states had no other way to get the benefits to workers in time. We needed a simple solution. And I know my colleague, the distinguished President of the Senate, and others who are sponsoring this proposal to unravel what Senate Democrats did with Secretary Mnuchin, the Trump administration, and Chairman Grassley may not believe me, but I want to share the words of Secretary Mnuchin himself, and specifically on this question of why we were focused on making sure that workers could get that extra $600 a week. Just today, Secretary Mnuchin said, and I'm going to quote here, most of these state systems have technology that's 30 years old or older. If we had the ability to customize this with much more specifics, we would have. This was the only way we could ensure states could get the money out quickly and in a fair way, so we used $600 across the board. I don't think it will create incentives. Most Americans want what they want. They want to keep their jobs. That is what Secretary Mnuchin said today in defending the language that is in the bill as, in effect, the fastest, simplest way for workers to get their benefits, and why we disagree so strongly with the amendment from the senator from Nebraska to unravel that approach. The math shows that a standard payment of $600 is the simplest way to get to full wage replacement without causing, as of now, an administrative train wreck. So I'm going to close on this. I'm sure that everybody here read that unemployment claims are expected to go up by $2.5 million in 1 week when the statistics are released tomorrow. Let me say that again, 2.5 million. That's almost as many jobs that were lost in the entire year of 2008 when the Great Recession hit our country so hard. It's the single largest rise in unemployment since that figure began to be tracked. 12 entire months worth of Great Recession job losses, That's how many unemployment claims economists expect to see in a single week. This country has never faced anything like it. It's not a normal recession. This isn't a normal bill to try to stimulate the economy in which the government tries to give the economy a shot of fiscal adrenaline. This is a time when we face a shutdown of entire sectors of our economy. What the Congress needs to do is keep our economy alive and act now. We're not going to do that by shortchanging workers who are losing jobs, losing hours, or losing gigs. I feel so strongly Americans want to work. Businesses want to keep their employees on the job. Americans want the economy to spring back to life once the pandemic is under control. And that's what supercharging unemployment benefits is all about. So here's the bottom line on the provision that Senate Democrats agreed with the Trump administration, Secretary Mnuchin, and Chairman Grassley on. Our proposal was not a drafting error. It didn't pop out at the last minute. It's not going to bring about the end of Western civilization. I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will review what Secretary Mnuchin had to say this afternoon on national television, supporting what Democrats, Senate Democrats, negotiated with him and the administration, and join us in making sure millions and millions of Americans don't fall into destitution. I yield the floor.